people are ready, longing to cleanse the system and bring about some real reform. When I was writing my biography of Picasso, Francois Giraud said to me, there are doors in space that you walk through, and there are doors in time that you wait for. So I feel that this is a door in time that we've been waiting for. And if you look throughout history, there are opportune moments for change, and this is one of them. And what I'm arguing here is that we need to get involved. Like any great movement for reform, it does take a collection of people to make their voices heard before change happens. My two great icebergs, other than the one I already mentioned, the growing inequalities, the other great iceberg is something that no presidential candidate dares address, and this is the failure of the drug war. We now have 2 million people. I want to really stop and take this number in. 2 million people in jail in this country. And many of them, growing numbers of them, are non-violent drug offenders. We spend $40 billion a year on the drug war. And nobody in politics is looking at the injustices of mandatory sentencing, for example, that falls disproportionately on minorities and African Americans because we have different rules depending on whether you are caught with crack cocaine or powder cocaine, which is just totally nonsensical. And yet, at the Apollo Theater, when the Vice President was asked about that, he did not dare come out against mandatory sentencing. That's how spineless our politicians have become. My other pet crusade is the fact that we now have millions of our children on Ritalin and Prozac and other mood-altering drugs. And there are studies that have shown that children who have been on these drugs for long are much more likely to move on to illegal drugs, like cocaine and heroin. Isn't that commonsensical? If you haven't learned to deal with your emotions, to navigate life's roller coaster, you're going to possibly need some chemical to do it with. So I think, we just have to sit up and stop doing this to our children. But increasingly, preschoolers are being given mood-altering drugs, younger and younger. And let me tell you how this connects to campaign finance reform, because everything connects to campaign finance reform. Prozac is not approved by the FDA for pediatric use, and yet we have over 1 million children on it at the moment. When I started writing about this 4 years ago, and I called a member of Congress who happens to be a friend of mine and was on the FDA oversight committee, and I said, can you check that out? I said, what's going on here? He said to me, Ariana, I can't touch that. Eli Lilly is a big contributor. Eli Lilly is the manufacturer of Prozac. So basically, our political leaders were supposed to supply oversight. That's why it's called congressional oversight committees. They're turning a blind eye. We should start calling them congressional blind eye committees. Our children are being drugged. And there's even the connection with drugs, these legal drugs and violence. And if you look at them, at the description of these drugs, at their side effects, one of the side effects is mania. It's creating a condition of mania. It only affects a small percentage of children, but it's only a small percentage of children who are vulnerable anyway. It's not going to be the average child that's going to go berserk. So all these things connect to this issue of fundamental reform. And that's why I call the book How to Overthrow the Government, to show that the system has to be radically transformed. No wonder that more than 2/3 of eligible voters did not even bother to vote in the last election. That means 115 million Americans who have the right to vote did not vote. Now, I consider this a crisis in democracy. We spend $900 million a year exporting democracy abroad. I suggest we start doing something to import democracy in here.